give this 15th Foundation Year lecture. It's always very happy to get associated with the series, physical mode or the online mode. I'm very happy to give this talk. Now, as Professor Mani mentioned, this is a topic which is currently very relevant. Even in today's Indian Express, there was an article by former economic advisor Arvind Subramanian and his one of his co-authors. He wrote about the various options that are available to the government right now to accelerate the growth from the current slowdown that we have been experiencing. And he looked at various options. And he said, based on his analysis, he said that the only viable option that is open to the government is to promote exports. Why he says like that is that he shows data to show that exports, in fact, contrary to what many people believe, actually contributed quite a bit to India's post-reform growth performance. So it was a non-trivial contribution. He has shown that with data, and also he says that. In the present context, there is a kind of pessimism that export may not be the way to go ahead. We have to rather turn inward, tapping the domestic market for growth. So he shows that that wouldn't really work in going forward. So he's strongly arguing in favor of going back to the export promotion based strategy. At the same time, the government is going more inward. That is what some of the more recent policy announcements are indicating. So in this context, I wanted to situate this larger context in which I wanted to talk about these various policy announcements that the government has announced ever since this current government came to power, and how some of these policies actually make sense and where there are problems, why some of them are actually contradictory in nature, and to what extent these policy announcements can help India to accelerate its export growth, etc. Now, this is the main purpose. The main purpose is to highlight certain contradictions between the government's pronounced objective of rapid export growth and some of the trade policy initiatives. So here I wanted to point out that even though the government is talking about self-reliance, Atmanirbhar Bharat, etc., they at the same time also say that we wanted to participate in export and we wanted to achieve export growth. So it's not like that government is saying that is now no more export growth. It's not like going the planning period, the import substitution type of policies. This is what the government is clarifying when people are asking whether it is going back to the import substitution policy. They say no. We want to be part of the global trading system, but at the same time, we wanted to promote a domestic industry. So this is the kind of, so there is some kind of confusion about how this can happen. Along with the more restrictive trade regime, how is it possible for a country to also get export growth? So there are certain confusion about it. So I am looking at a number of policy initiatives that the government has announced from time to time, starting with the Make in India initiative, which was the first one. And then government made an important decision about opting out of Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, the RCEP. A lot of people expected that the government may sign these, but finally they didn't. And at the same time, during this government, it has not initiated any major free trade agreement with any countries. The European Union Free Trade Agreement has not progressed much. And then more recently, there is a different type of policy initiative, which was discussed in the economic survey, the most recent economic survey 2019-20, where it talked about the gains that a country can reap by focusing on a strategy of assembling in India for the world market. So that is more like getting part of the world trading system, getting participation in global value chains and all. So that is another policy. Now, within few months after this economic survey article came, they went completely the other way around. That is the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan in the post-COVID scenario. The self-reliant India movement was announced. Now you see that here all kind of confusing signals and a great deal of. Hello, is there any question? Hello.
No, I think it's somebody who was just
okay.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but if there are any clarificatory questions, please feel free to ask any time. Okay, so there are all these confusing signals and a great deal of uncertainty with respect to the trade policy orientation of this government. So the question is whether the government is trying to achieve export orientation or import substitution type of policy. So what is it actually it is trying to get is not very clear. So these are some of the things that I wanted to highlight here in this today's talk. I think my computer got stuck here, so it is not going to the next slide. Let me see. Yeah, okay. So before coming to the specific context of India, I would like to give a very more general background to this discussion, not just in the context of India, because what is going on in India is not disconnected with what is going on elsewhere in the world. So this backlash against globalization has started some time back, a few years back. It particularly started with Donald Trump's presidential election campaign in the US. And then there was this Brexit vote, which also was a backlash against the globalization, which was happening during the 90s and 2000s. And then the more recent reason for this backlash and this movement for self-reliance happened with the COVID-19 pandemic as a reaction to that. Now, during Trump's election campaign, he argued that US was not gaining from globalization. He said that trade with the developing countries, offshoring of production activities by US corporations, outward US FDI, and by US companies, and free trade agreements which US has signed, etc. All these were not beneficial to United States. He said that all these different aspects of globalization actually led to exporting of American jobs. So other countries like China and other developing countries, they gained at the cost of United States. So this is the kind of argument that he put forth. And then he also attacked immigration, saying that the immigrants from Mexico and other poor countries, they are stealing US jobs. And then he wanted to construct the US-Mexico border wall as part of that, that belief. Then China bashing was another important aspects of his campaign, where he said that China is a currency manipulator and China is a source of global imbalance, and it is dumping its products in different countries, and then it is also indulged in various other anti-competitive practices, which all culminated in the US-China trade war. There was a tariff increase against China, and China retaliated, and all that has happened. Now, more recently, the COVID-19 exacerbated the protectionist pressures, which already started sometime before COVID-19. It also already started. Now the things have become more stronger. So there is a growing demand for shortening of supply chains, reshoring, and greater self-sufficiency. Now, this is happening not just in US or in the advanced countries. Now, this type of demand about shortening of supply chains, self-sufficiency, reshoring, which is just opposite of offshoring, all this is now becoming an important slogan, even in developing countries, including India. And in India, an additional thing has happened. That is the India-China border clash, which has happened. And in the context of that border clash, there is a call for the boycott of Chinese products by India. So all this means this is a larger background in which we are looking at this. Now the rhetoric of all these discussions about about all these discussions about the ill effects of globalization is very nicely illustrated in this cartoon, which came in Economist around the time the North Korean leader Kim was meeting Trump in Singapore. So at that time, Kim is saying that I will destroy America, to which Trump is saying, no way, that is my job. I don't want another Asian stealing an American job. Now, why? So clearly, the cartoonists understand the rhetoric of all these, and particularly why Trump doesn't make sense when he says all this is clear from some data as well. So if you look at some of the major traded products in the world, like, I am just illustrating a point here using certain products. So if you look at Apple iPod, which is an American company, and we know that America do assembly of iPhone or Apple iPod in China, even though it is an American company. But they also get parts and components needed for the production of Apple iPhone or iPad from different countries. Within the production process, China mostly specializes in assembly of the iPod. The parts and components are imported from different countries. And the factory gate price of an assembled iPod was $144 in 2008. But only $4 of this $144 constituted the Chinese value added, which was just 3% of the total value added in iPod. Who got the maximum, the bulk of the total value added? It is the United States. It is United States got close to 60% of the total value added, 60% of $144. That is the cost of every iPad went to United States, which is a home state, right? So that means the biggest beneficiary of this offshoring was not China. It was not any other country. It was United States itself. Now, if the Apple did not do this, offshoring, then they would have lost the market share in the world market, because their competitors would have sold their product at a lower cost, because this and their strategy of global value chain or doing assemblies in China is part of a cost reduction strategy by Apple. So if they are not allowed to do that, the cost of producing this product will significantly go up. So that would lead to loss of competitiveness for the American company. When we say that China got only 3% of the total value added, we should not think that the gain for China from this is quite small. It is not small, obviously, because you have to look at the scale effect. Because even though it is just $4 for one iPad, China is assembling the iPad for the world as a whole. Now, Apple sold about 55 million iPods in 2008. So 55 million iPod means 55 multiplied by 4 is 219 million, which is not a trivial amount. Now, if China is doing this in a large number of products, which it does, then it means that the total domestic value added happening within China is quite high. So this is the old gain that developing countries can get, even though in terms of the share is small, but the overall in terms of the scale, the gain is quite big, which will not be which will not be available in case China is not part of this value chain. But at the same time, United States gain much more. That is expected because Apple is a US company, and their high value added production process are retained within the United States. So that is why they get a much higher share in this. The same thing hold also for the other product, that is the iPhone, Apple iPhone. I think there is some serious problem with my mouse. It is not going. I have to. Okay. Now, this similar thing can be seen also in the case of iPhone 7. Again, United States is the biggest beneficiary of the offshoring of iPhone 7. China gets makes only $8, whereas United States make $68 when one iPhone is sold in the market. Now, now with this, I want to come to the India story. What has been happening to India? In Indian case, we see that in India, throughout the post-reform period, Indian exports grew much faster than world exports during the post-reform period. But we can see a very significant growth slowdown since 2012, which can be seen both in services and in merchandise. So we can see that in 2012 to 2019, both Indian export as well as world export is mostly, it was stagnant. There was no growth at all. Prior to that, Indian growth, which is the blue line there, has always been higher than the world growth, both in services and in manufacturing. Now, another recent development, which we can notice here, is that, so one is that export growth has significantly gone down. Now the question is whether it has gone down because the world demand was not doing well. But that alone is not the reason. Here, what I do is that I show the share of exports and imports as a percentage of India's GDP. And India's exports as a percentage of GDP reached about 25%, which is the highest that India ever achieved by around 2012. But after that, you see that there is a steady decline in the share of exports in India's GDP. And we can see that that also in imports. So both exports and imports as a share of GDP has declined significantly since 2012. So this is again indicating that we are turning more inward in the more recent years after a major globalization that we achieved after 1991. Now, let me look at some of the policy initiatives that the government announced, which has some relevance to export. First one was the Make in India initiative, which was launched in 2014, which targeted 25 economic sectors for job creation, skill enhancement, and it is aimed to transform India into a global design and manufacturing hub. So this is the kind of objective. But there are, in this policy package, there are a lot of confusion and conflicting signals. If you carefully look at various ingredients of the policy and the different announcements that government made from time to time. So one important question is whether this strategy of Make in India, is it a strategy based on import substitution, or is it a strategy based on global integration? So basically, these are the two trade policy regimes or trade policy strategies. And which strategy does it fit into? So there are certain policy initiatives that the government has done which would suggest that it is more based on import substitution. But at the same time, there are certain other things that the government did which gives an impression that it is based on global integration strategy. So government has been increasing its import tariff rates, India's import tariff rates, starting from around 2017 onwards. There has been a major increase in import tariff rate. I will show data on that later. And then we have opted out of RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Agreement, and we have not signed any major free trade agreement. So all this would suggest that it is something based on protection and import substitution. So whenever government announced any new tariff, they said that we wanted to protect the domestic industry. So that was the kind of justification given for imposing the tariff rate. But at the same time, whenever Prime Minister visited different countries, he met global companies and their CEOs, and he invited them to come to India to set up foreign direct investment in various industries. So that is a strategy which will go with a global integration type of strategy. So if you want to be part of the global value chain, you need these companies to come to India. So it will be more along with the strategy of global integration, whereas increasing tariff, opting out of RCEP, etc., is more of a protection-based strategy. Now, if we put these strategies together, so there is a liberal FDI, foreign companies can come to India without much problem. There is also significant liberalization that was undertaken in certain sectors for FDI, etc. But at the same time, there are tariff increases. The government is also imposing certain licenses, import licenses for certain products, which is now becoming a serious problem for some of the industries. So all these, when taken together, what does it mean? Taken together, this strategy can only result in some kind of tariff jumping FDI into India. Traditionally, FDI is classified into two parts. One is the tariff jumping or the market seeking, domestic market seeking FDI, and the other one is the export oriented FDI. Now, when you have a high tariff for intermediate goods and your trade regime is very restrictive, then a company which is based in another country, if they wanted to capture Indian market, a best strategy for them is to come and set up their manufacturing facilities in India, because otherwise they have to pay tariffs to sell their product to India. So when there are tariffs, the optimal policy for this company is to come and set up their plants in India and sell it in the domestic market. But they cannot sell their product to the foreign market, because if they have to do that, they have to get intermediate inputs at a very low tariffs, which is not available. Government has been increasing tariffs for even intermediate inputs, several intermediate inputs. So these companies will come to India, but they will come to India with the objective of selling in the domestic market, not for the export purpose, not to use India as a platform, as a base for their export growth. So these two things together is clearly inconsistent with the aim of export growth. You cannot have an export growth in a situation where FDI comes, but the trade regime is restrictive. That cannot happen. Not only that, it is a very textbook knowledge. The basic textbook knowledge is that import tariffs always act as a tax on exports. So when a country imposes tariffs on its products, the domestic prices go up. Domestic prices for those products on which tariffs are imposed, they go up. That means for companies, it is more profitable to sell domestically rather than export. So an import tariff discriminates against export. It is a tax on export, and it incentivizes firms to sell in the domestic market, because under the tariff barriers, the domestic prices are higher. So why should you go and sell your product abroad where you get a lower price, right? That is the tariff create a wedge in the price between the domestic and the foreign market. So import tariffs always act as a tax on exports, and resources will be reallocated to those sectors where domestic prices are high because of import tariffs. That means your export will go down. So that is again not consistent with the objective of rapid export growth. And the third one is that import substitution based strategy clearly will not work in a world of global value chains, where production process in several industries, in several manufacturing industries are globally fragmented, where parts and components are produced in various countries, assembly takes place in some other locations. So when this is the way the world is organized, the business is organized across the world, you cannot achieve export growth through a strategy of import substitution. That you have to cut yourself out of this global value chain business altogether, which will not help the country to enter into the foreign market. Okay, so now more recently, there is this survey, an article, a chapter in Economic Survey in 2019-20 Economic Survey carried an article on export, on the strategy on promoting export. And here, the objective is to create jobs and growth by specializing in network products. Now, what are network products? These are a group of products where production process is globally fragmented. These are the industries where global value chains are very dominant. Now, the strategy here is to integrate assemble in India for the world into make in India. So you are now bringing in a new element into it, which says that your make in India means you have to assemble in India, right? So now the problem with this argument, I will come to that. But basically, the objective of the government is to achieve significant growth in export. It has put a very ambitious target of 6% of world market into 2030 by focusing in these type of industries, where global value chains, by participating in global value chain kind of activities, which can create a lot of well-paid jobs. The Economic Survey gives the details about this. Now, the underlying conceptual framework for these type of strategies given here. So basically what happens is that when the country participate in assembly business, it will be using imported inputs and then do the domestic assembly. Now the domestic value addition per unit of assembled product may be very small, like the case of Apple iPhone that I indicated earlier, where China is getting only just 3%, but China is doing it for the world market. So when you are doing it world market, there is a scale effect, and there is also a productivity effect because you are selling for the world market. So the scale and productivity effect means the absolute value of export and the absolute value of domestic value added from this assembly activity are going to be very high. This is what China has done at least during its initial stage of expansion. China is about 50% of Chinese exports are electronic and electrical machinery. And in most of those cases, China is specializing in assembly segment of those products. They get intermediate goods from other countries and then do the assembly. The domestic value added per unit of assembled product is small, but in the aggregate, it is quite high. So this is basically the type of strategy that they have in mind when they want to incorporate this assembly as one of the strategies. Now, in the case of China, high participation in assembly has been crucial for China's export success. Now, in the context of India, when we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat, we are talking more about local linkages. We are not talking about the global value chain, participation in global value chain, which is just opposite of GVCs. So we wanted to create linkages domestically, and the alternative strategy, which was mentioned in the Economic Survey chapter, is the participation in GVC. Now, which one of these strategy will give us more job, more value added? All this was analyzed using evidence in the survey, Economic Survey article, and it shows that GVC participation would result in higher value added and employment within the country as opposed to the local linkage strategy. Local linkages would sound good because if you say that you get everything from domestic sources for your intermediate goods, components, etc. within India, obviously it may sound like a good strategy, but then that is not the way the global economy is working. because then you will have to do this domestic linkage, Atmanirbhar Bharat, just to target Indian market. And Arvind Subramaniam's today's article shows that even though Indian market may look very big, it is not exactly so, because the argument that he's making is that about only 40% of the income will go to the middle class. The total GDP of India belong to the middle class. Because of a high inequality, the people who are going to have a very high purchasing power account for a small portion, a small share of the total number of people. So this large domestic market doesn't mean that we can sell a lot by cutting ourselves off from the global world market and targeting only the domestic market. He also makes the points that if Indian companies are able to be competitive in the international market by exporting their product, then the chances that you will capture the domestic market is much higher than the other way around. Because if you are competitive domestically, you may get some of the domestic market, but you cannot export your product, because there are others outside, your competitors, who are part of this global value chain strategy to reduce cost, and you cannot compete with them. So under an umbrella of protection, tariff barriers, you can capture some of the domestic market, but you cannot export. So you cannot have both the domestic market and export under this strategy. So if you want to have both, then you have to be getting yourself linked with the global value chains. Now, there is one more reason why this strategy will work better now for India, because there are all evidence now which suggests that assembly business is now shifting out of China. There are various reasons for that. One is the economic reason, which is that as China is becoming richer, their labor productivity is improving. So labor shortages are happening and wages are increasing in China. So China is losing some of its earlier advantage in assembly. And those activities are now shifting increasingly to Vietnam and other East Asian countries. The other reason is the US-China trade war, which is again an incentive for companies which were based in China to go and set up their assembly business elsewhere. And more recently, the COVID-19 led to diversification of supply chains, and the firms are now looking for diversifying their supply chains away from China because of the high risk in concentrating everything in one country. So all this means the geopolitical developments are now against China, and there is an opportunity for India to attract these companies. And in fact, things are happening, already started happening. For example, Apple has now started producing 4 of its models of iPhones in India through its manufacturing partners. These are the assembly companies like Foxconn and Wistron. So they have set up facilities in India already. And Samsung has set up the world's biggest mobile factory in Noida. And there are several such opportunities. And we are going to miss all these opportunities if we now think about self-reliance and Atmanirbhar Bharat type of an approach. Now, when we talk about this opportunity here, what is the the size of this market, this network products market in the world? So this is quite big. The network products accounted for about 5.6 trillion US dollar in 2018. And this is about 20 or 30% of total world trade in merchandise. So that means it's a big market. And if we can get a share of this, our export can actually grow quite a lot. And there is a lot of potential here. Now, right now, India is a very minor player here. If you compare India with other countries, this graph shows the billions, US dollar billion of exports and the imports by different countries. And India is the only country here which has higher import than export among all these Asian countries. And India has a very, very small value of export here. So that means the opportunities are really huge. And these network products account for only 10% of India's total export. For other countries, it is nearly one half of their total export, about 50% for China, Korea, Japan, and all that, and even Vietnam. It has gone up from 6% to 47% in recent times. So there are a lot of this dynamism that happens in this sector. And the important thing to note, as I said, as I am going to show here, is that people may think that is it possible to capture this market? China is already there in this market. Then there is other countries. Now, how is it possible for India to go and get its share in that? So, is it a feasible strategy to enter into this market where China has already established its presence in a major way? Now, what I am going to argue here is that that kind of fear is completely misplaced, because if you look at this sector, this network product sector, over a long period of time, how the export pattern in this sector has evolved over a long period time, we see a very clear pattern here, because this can be characterized by what the Japanese economist earlier called Akamatsu, called the wild geese flying pattern of export performance. So what has happened is, I am going to show this with the data. Japan was the lead goose, which was the country which started its export in this sector long time back, several decades back. And then it provided capital, technology, and managerial know-how to the follower geese countries in East and Southeast Asia. And then they picked up, and Japan went down slowly. Now, these wild geese fly in orderly ranks, forming an inverse V shape, just as airplanes fly in formation. And now, if you look at the export market performance of various countries, we see a very clear inverted V pattern for network products. That is what this graph is showing. So the purple color graph there is for Japan. So Japan started its export. So what we have on the vertical axis, there is the world market share of different countries. On the left side, it is the world market share of Japan and China. On the right side, it is the world market share of Korea, Singapore, and Malaysia. So you can see this, the purple color graph, which took off from early 60s for Japan. It went up and it reached its peak around mid 1980s, and then it started declining. So it's a clear inverted V, like the flying geese pattern. It's a clear inverted V. Now, after Japan, then other countries followed. Countries like Korea followed. It reached a peak, and then it started going down. Then countries like Malaysia, also you can see a similar pattern. Singapore, you can see a similar pattern. And more recently, you can see China. But even in the case of China, we can see that the point of inflection has already reached, right? The top point. Here you can see the red line is for China. It has reached the top. So it is now started going down. And when China goes down, that is where other countries can enter, right? And India has that opportunity to enter. Why? Because India has the similar endowments that China had to survive in this market, like a large scale, abundant, low skilled labor. That is what you need for this. And India has a lot of abundant, low skilled labor. Now, this is the situation, the same graph for other countries. And we can see that India has started a small pickup, but it is nowhere in the picture. A small country, Vietnam, has a much higher market share in this market compared to India. The Vietnam graph is the green one, which has a much higher share than India. So this shows that India has a big potential in this market, provided the policies are appropriate. Now, one more thing to note about this market is that when we say about network products, it can be categorized into two broad groups. One is the assembled end products. End products means those which are consumed by the consumer, that finally goes to the consumption purpose. The other one is the intermediate goods, the parts and components. Now, when we talk about network products, there are these two categories. Now, the history of most of these countries show that initially the countries enter in this market by specializing in assembly, right? The Japan's case, you can see that the blue line is assembly. The red one is the parts and components. So it started specializing or entering in assembly in a major way, and then it reached a peak and then going down. Now, for several countries, like for example, Singapore, the inflection point for assembly reached much earlier, but they continued with their production of parts and components. You can see the same thing for Korea, Malaysia. So all these countries, the assembly business, they lost comparative advantage rather quickly, which is very easy to understand because assembly is highly labor intensive. So once the wage cost go up, then assembly business, they lose comparative advantage. But they continue producing parts and components. So in the case of China, the inflection point which we noted in the previous graph is again because of assembly, not because of parts and components. So China is going to continue in this market, but not so much in assembly, but they will continue in high tech, relatively more high tech products, which are parts and components, which are needed for these products. So China will shift out of assembly, but enter into more parts and components, which are the high tech stages of the production process within these sector. So this is what is going to what is the history, what has happened in the past. So that clearly indicates that India has an option. So the argument that these countries are already there and we cannot enter there, that is not possible, does not make sense. That's an unwarranted fear. So there are opportunities there. But we need to have our policies correct, right? If the policies are not appropriate, this is not going to happen, because we missed the bus earlier when China expanded its labor-intensive product like clothing, garments, and all that. They in the 1980s they exported clothes, textiles, garments, toys, and all that, and we missed that opportunity. Now this is a very good opportunity for a country like India, because multinational companies are now looking for other locations, particularly because of the recent developments, geopolitical developments, and so on. So we need the correct policies at this time. So one of the important policy is about a tariff rate. So import tariff rates for intermediate inputs should be zero, because if the import tariff rates are high, countries cannot find India as an attractive location for doing assembly business, because they are importing parts and components from other countries and then do assembly here, for which imports should be intermediate imports, capital goods imports, etc., should come free without any tariff. And the other important issue is that there is a problem of inverted tariff. The inverted tariff is a serious problem for India. I am going to show the numbers here to show that there is a serious issue of inverted tariff. Now, what is inverted tariff? Inverted tariff exists when the duty rate for the final good, that is a finished good, is lower than the duty rate for the parts and components. So when you are making television, so there are final good is the television, the final television that the consumers buy. And then intermediate goods are the parts and components used in television, in producing television. Now, India, we have a very peculiar situation where the tariff rate for several of these final goods is lower than the tariff rate for intermediate goods. Now, what will happen in such kind of a situation? We cannot do domestic assembly here, because domestic assembly becomes uncompetitive, because it is easier to buy or import this final good from other country rather than doing assembly domestically. So that is a issue of inverted tariff. So that type of a structure could render the relevant manufacturing process uncompetitive, because it makes sense to import the final good from other country rather than producing it domestically, using by importing parts and components for which the duty rates are high, right? So this is a particularly a serious issue for network products. All right, several of these computer hardware, several of electronic products and all, because as part of the WTO, there was a information technology agreement. As part of that, we have brought down tariffs for several of these high-tech products, but the import tariffs on parts and components which are used in these products remain quite high, but the final good tariff is low. So that is a problem, and that need to be addressed. Now, okay. So now, sorry, some major problem. Okay. Now, this is what has happened to tariffs in India in recent times. Between 1991 and 2014, the average tariff, import tariff in India has declined from 125% to 13%. But since 2014, we can see a major increase. The tariff rate has increased. It has increased in 3,200 products out of 5,300 total number of products, which has affected about 70% of total imports. So, as part of the Make in India program earlier, which gave a justification for such a tariff increase, and now more importantly, the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, etc., tariffs have been increasing in India. So the progress that we achieved earlier by reducing tariffs significantly is now getting reversed. Now our import tariff rate is about 18%, which is quite high compared to other countries, our competitors. Now this is that comparison of India with China and Vietnam. You see that the Indian tariff rates, this is before this increase that has happened in India, this 13.5%. Now it is 18%. So before that itself, our tariff rate was much higher than that of both China and Vietnam. And in fact, China's effective tariff rates are even lower than this because they have these export processing zones where a lot of their assembly business happens, where tariffs are almost zero for many of them. So that means that we don't have that type of policy regime which is needed for promoting assembly here across the board. It may be true, it may be happening in some sectors because of specific policies which were being adopted there, but not across the board. Now, this is true, this tariff difference is true not just for aggregate, but also if you separate intermediate inputs and final goods. This is for intermediate goods. So Indian intermediate goods tariffs are much higher than that of both India, both China and Vietnam. Final goods also, it is the same situation. Now, these are some of the recent announcements in the tariff in 2020-21 budget. I have selected only some products here. Why I selected them is because these are precisely what we call parts and components used in network products, right? So the Economic Survey 2019-20 said that we have a big opportunity there. Then the budget that followed increased the tariff rates for intermediate goods. This is completely contradictory, right? About what the government wanted to do and what it is doing. It's completely contradictory. So all these are important parts and components which are used in several network products for which tariffs went up in that budget. Prior to that, in 2019-20 also, there are a number of such products where it has increased. Before that, in 2018 budget, there are 2,400 products where tariffs went up. So this is a very serious problem. Now, I also show the tariff inversion in terms of number, like, to what extent, what is the extent of tariff inversion that exists in India. So tariff structure is inverted when the ratio here, when the input tariff for a given industry is greater than the output tariff for the same industry. So when we say input tariff for a given industry, we wanted to look at which are the various input used for making a particular industry. That information you can get it from input output table or supply use table, which gives the information about which are the various input used in the production process of each of the industry. And we look at the tariffs of those inputs, the average tariffs of all those inputs at the very detailed level, at the disaggregated level, to find out what are the tariff rates there. And then we also look at the tariff rate for the final good in that industry, for the final good input. So if the input tariff for a given industry is greater than the output tariff, this ratio will be greater than 1. And if it is greater than 1, we can say that there is a tariff inversion problem there. Tariff is inverted. We have inverted tariff structure, which is not good. Now, this is exactly what is happening in network products. In network products includes manufacturing of communication equipment, electric equipment, machinery and equipment, etc. So we have shown this average output tariff for them, average input tariff. The average input tariffs are much higher than the average output tariff. So tariff inversion, the values are much higher than 1 for all the products under what is called manufacture of communication equipment. There is clearly a tariff inversion. For other products also, it is very close to 1 or just above 1. So there is a problem of tariff inversion across all these products, in the sense that the input tariffs are higher than output tariff, which means that there is no incentive for companies to do final production here. The better thing is to import the final good rather than produce it here. So if you want to correct this, there are two ways to correct it. One is make all the input tariff 0. Identify which are the major inputs which are used here, which is easy to understand from the input output table, etc. Make them 0. And you can retain those output tariff if you want, like, because then tariff inversion will not be there, because you have 0 tariff and then output tariff can be little higher, even though it is not advisable to have it very high, because that will lead to other problems of inefficiencies and all other issues. But the straightforward way of doing that is to reduce these input tariff, identify them and reduce it. Now, the only sector where we don't see an inverted tariff problem is the automobile sector. And this clearly explains why our automobile sector did relatively well, right? We are exporting automobile, particularly passenger cars, small and compact passenger cars. India has emerged has become a major assembly center, right? A lot of intermediate goods come from other countries, but we assemble them and export to other countries, and we don't have a tariff inversion problem there, right? It is values are less than 1 there. And electronic component, electronics sector, etc., where we are nowhere in the picture in the world market, there is a serious problem of tariff inversion. Now, when we compare this with China, I will just conclude it with 1 or 2 slides. When we compare this tariff inversion with China, we see that we have a problem. China does not have a problem. China's tariff inversion is below 1. So, in fact, it will be much below what is shown here as the red line, because we don't have a separate data on export processing zones, the tariff rates which are applied there, which is 0. So if you include that part, it will even go further down. But India clearly has a tariff inversion problem which need to be corrected if we want to promote our exports. Now, I also did a regression analysis. I am not going to the detail of that, which confirms some of our hypothesis, that when you have a tariff inversion in a sector, one thing is very clear: output as a ratio of export as a ratio of output goes down. Right? These are regression analysis controls for all other sector-specific, sector fixed effect, year fixed effects, and the other controls, etc. And we find that export as a ratio of output clearly goes down in sectors where there are tariff inversion. Higher the tariff inversion, lower is the export intensity. We are getting that from the regression analysis. Similarly, we are finding that higher is the tariff inversion, lower is our participation in global value chain. So we use a certain measure to calculate global value chain. The foreign value added content of India's export is used as a measure, and we do this regression using a panel framework. And we find that I am not going to the details of that regression because I don't want to get into those technical things in this talk. Okay, so this is my last slide. In the context of this most COVID-19 pandemic, protectionist pressures are growing all over the world, including in India. In India, the response is the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan, and then adding fuel to the fire was the border clash with China, which led to the mass boycotting of Chinese goods, the call for mass boycotting of Chinese goods, and severing our trade links with China. In general, these kind of measures are irrational and counterproductive. There is no type of strong economic logic for such type of measures. And in fact, it is counterproductive, especially in the current context, because the changing global geopolitics now is offering new opportunities for India, while China is finding itself at the receiving end. So instead of making use of this emerging opportunity, doing the other way around will not actually be helpful. Then companies are looking, many are looking to diversify their supply chains. So there are a lot of opportunities here, and the cost of imposing trade barriers generally outweigh any benefits. Trade barriers will raise the prices that consumers have to pay in India, and it will reduce the productivity of domestic firms. When you have a protective environment, there is no compulsion for domestic firms to improve their productivity. And very surprisingly, auto companies in India, which is a big success story in India, it has to get import license now to import superior quality tires that are not available domestically. The most recent development. Right now, companies, if they wanted to buy superior quality tires, they have to apply for a license, which is a pre-1990 period. We are going back to that, introducing import license. Same is the story for some of the big TV manufacturing companies. They had to apply for import licenses. These are newspaper reports that is coming now. If they wanted to import some premium TV sets, which they don't want to produce here because the Indian market for that is very, very small, but they are producing other things, other TVs. But if they wanted to import these, then they have to get an import license. So this is not the ease of doing business. This is making it difficult for these companies to operate in India. It will also weaken India's participation in GVCs and hence miss the opportunity of creating jobs for the India's youth. The goal of Atmanirbhar Bharat can only be achieved by improving domestic productivity, not by creating restrictions on competition from abroad. So if you are serious about self-reliance, the best way to achieve that is to find out ways in which Indian companies can successfully compete with the foreign companies, which may include various things like even collaborations, joint ventures, all kind of things, making their operations in India easy and ease of doing business kind of reforms. All these are what is needed. So domestic productivity of the domestic companies have to go up so that they can compete with the foreign company. That can make us what we call self-reliance, not by creating restrictions and giving this type of protection to the domestic companies under protective umbrella. We have tried that earlier, and we have abandoned that because it didn't deliver the growth when we tried that. Now going back to that is not at all a wise idea. So that's all I want to say. I will be happy to take questions. And
Thank you very much, Veeramani, for such a comprehensive presentation. I think you made out a very strong case for assembly activity in India by reversing the inverted tariff structure. And you also showed, the contradictions in public policies in India. And this is yet another example. Now the floor is open. Those who would like to ask a question could either unmute and ask the question, then mute yourself, or you can put that question in the chat box and I will read out that for Dr. Any questions?
Yes, Professor Sonal Mani, this is Balagopal.
Please ask.
Hello?
Please, yes, please, Bala. Please ask your question.
Yeah, I listened with a lot of interest to Professor Veeramani's basic proposition that inverted tariffs has played a major role in the backwardness of finished product assembly in the situation in India vis-a-vis Vietnam and others, and that they just implied he specifically makes a recommendation that if we change this policy, and he cites the example of the automobile sector, the sector growing. I have my doubts about that because while the automobile sector definitely is a standout, appears to be a standout example of success of tariff policy in promoting local assembly. I think if you in the last 2 days there. Specifically, my question is this: that in the case of the Bangladesh economy, especially the garment export sector, they seem to have done a much better job of taking advantage of the opportunities opened up by the shift of the garment manufacturing sector away from China and other places due to rising wages. And Vietnam and Bangladesh seem to have taken up the slack, but India failed. Now, here I come back to, I think one basic issue is, it's very interesting. In today's Indian Express, there is, in the center page, there is an article which compares these two and says, the difference between Bangladesh and India is we lose sight of the fact that their human development indices are far superior to those of India. India's human development indices even today are not where East Asia had reached in 1970s and 1980s. So we are running up against, our manufacturing sector is running up against localized supply shortages of labor, of trainable and trained labor in many parts of India. In Coimbatore, industrial labor is simply impossible to get. And you can hardly, while Coimbatore is quite highly industrialized, you cannot say it's a South Korea or it's like Taiwan or anything like that. So why these localized shortages are rising is because of failures of our policy, past policy, where we did not provide a public, we did not do public provision of education, private health, public health, etc. So I don't think by just, my question is this, I question the thesis that if we just tweak tariff policies, are we going to make a significant impact on manufacturing capabilities in India?
Thank you, Balagopal sir. I'm happy to meet you here. I met you last time at this conference there.
Yes.
Yeah, very. I agree with you. Tariff alone is not the thing. It's not a magic bullet. But it is what I mean to say is that it's an absolutely necessary condition, but it is, of course, it is not a sufficient condition. We need to do a lot of other things, like as you rightly pointed out, investment in scaling, education. All that has to go simultaneously along with that. So it is not just that. Now, the point is that even if we do all that, but if our tariff structure is distorted, then we will not achieve what we want to achieve. So that is one thing. The other point related to what the thing that you mentioned is that while you are absolutely right when you say that Vietnam or Bangladesh, their human development indicators are quite better than India. That is true. But then we also have to keep in mind that one of the reasons why in Bangladesh the human development, there are several reasons. One of the reasons why it is high is exactly because the pattern of growth that they followed led to kind of creation of jobs for women, mostly for women workers, because about more than 80% of the workers in Bangladesh garment industries are women. Now, there is a lot of literature which says that if women get income, then they spend that income more wisely on their children, on healthcare, etc., which would lead to the kind of human development that Bangladesh has achieved. Whereas in India, the pattern of growth was very different. It has not led to growth of low-skilled, labor-intensive industries, so that the people who are marginalized, who are poor, could not be part of the growth process in a significant way. So we didn't achieve that human development indicator. This is again an endogenous outcome of our growth process and the difference in Bangladesh and India. So when we do the assembly type of business, one offshoot of that, like spillover effect of that would be that it would also lead to kind of human development development that we want to achieve, because the people who are going to work in this assembly type of business are not going to be really from well-off family or highly educated people. It would be those who are basic education. Can be working in a mobile assembly factory or this type of factory with little bit training. They can be employed, so that will have a huge spillover effect in the society.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions? I think.
Yes. Can I ask?
Yes, of course.
Parameshwaran. Yeah. Veeramani is very good lecture, and I enjoyed it. And yeah, one issue is that especially to how to stimulate manufacturing growth in India. And when you look at the recent literature, there are two. One is that it is the domestic market is very small, and this is the part attributed to the increasing inequality. And so if we want to improve the, if we are focusing on domestic market, then we are domestic market driven manufacturing growth, we have to address the inequality issues. Inequality in India is affecting supply side as well as the demand side. So when you made this, then another option is to go for an export-oriented strategy. But here, I don't think these two are not mutually exclusive, because actually, if we want to succeed, we have to address both. And definitely, as you have told, we cannot run an autarkic state now, because it is much more valid now, because in 70s or 60s, 50s, the production was not that internationally fragmented. Now it is really fragmented, and I don't think now one product is produced in many countries. So imposing tariff and trade restrictions actually deprive us of improving our developing our manufacturing sector. But we have to focus on our domestic market also, because when you look at the Indian economic growth rate from 2002 to 2013, for that high growth phase, it is largely driven by the exports growth rate. But after some time, it stopped. So now, if we and also it is also important that to export success, to improve the domestic capability, we have to address the domestic issues also, like inequality, and slowly we have to increase our domestic market size. I think that way these two are complementary, not as a substitute. That it's not as an alternative or mutually exclusive. Because you made that better to focus on export strategy. I think that is what my view.
Okay, thank you, Parameshwaran, for that question. So yeah, broadly, I agree with what you are saying, but I just wanted to make one clarification. Uh, so what I am saying is that I am not saying at all that we should not look at our domestic market opportunities in the domestic market at all. It doesn't imply that at all. So basically, when we say that when we focus on export, then the offshoot of that export success will obviously be the domestic market, because a company which is successful in the export market will obviously do not find it very difficult to be competitive in the domestic market. So it's like, we say that, when we look for, if a student want to enter IIT, they should prepare for the JEE exam. They may end up, they may not get IIT, but they may get some other very good other institution. So if you are aiming for the smaller institution, you may not get IIT, but if you are aiming for IIT, you may end up getting some other institution which may be below IIT. So it is in that spirit what I am talking about promoting export. That obviously means we have to get our domestic market also. But when it comes to strategy, which strategy as a strategy focus, what should we look at? Basically, in trade literature, in trade theory, basically the theoretical argument is that policy should be neutral. Policy should not be either promoting export or promoting domestic market. It should be a neutral strategy. So policy as a whole should not provide anything specifically to incentivize export, or it should not do anything to specifically incentivize selling in the domestic market. When you have a neutral policy where you don't discriminate between the two, then the outcome is going to be the best, because then you are going to use your resources in the best possible manner, because you are not artificially creating an export competitiveness. Similarly, you are not artificially discriminating against export or against domestic market. So when you have a policy which is neutral, which obviously means, what is that neutral policy? Neutral policy is something where you say that, I don't care whether you export or you sell in the domestic market. This is not this option or that option. I wanted to make the policy has to make our productivity of our industry the best. So we have to be the most productive firms. It will be up to the firm whether they want to sell their product in the foreign market or the domestic market. So if this discussion whether domestic market or foreign market is actually a misleading kind of discussion. It should be about wherever you can sell. The objective is to make the firms more productive.
Okay, Veeramani, I think there is a question from a person called Saji George, and he has put that in the chat box. So shall I raise that question on his behalf?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Now he's saying that the world economy is in recession now. So if you want to focus on an export-oriented strategy at this point, it may not be very valid. And so you may have to focus just on the domestic market to stay afloat.
True, yeah. So if you think in the very short term, what is happening right now, it is true that the world economy is in recession. Different countries in the world are not doing great, but that is very much expected in a lockdown type of situation. We don't expect anything different from this. Now, we are not saying about the immediate strategy, what we need to do immediately once the lockdown is eased and things become normal. There is no reason to believe that the world economy will stay at the place where it is now. Right? World economy can also grow once the situations improve in other countries. Now, even if we think that there is not a very significant growth that is happening in the world economy going forward in the coming years, but still, I think what we can actually do in the world market, even under the status quo, the present kind of situation, what we can do in the world market is much, much more than what we are actually doing. A very small country, Vietnam, it is a very tiny country when it comes to, in comparison to India. Their world market share is so many times bigger than India's world market share. Bangladesh exports much more than India in garments. Now, how is it possible for a very small country to achieve such a large market share in the world market, while a big country like India is accounting for a minuscule portion of the world trade? So that means even under a situation where the world economy is not doing great, I think we have a great potential which can be exploited, especially in the current context where the global opinion is changing against China. There are MNEs which are trying to look at for other alternative locations, etc. There is a huge opportunity. May not be immediate short run, but in the coming years.
Any further questions from the floor?
I have one more question.
Yeah. Okay.
This is Balagopal again, and Professor Veeramani, one of the, the basic thesis is tariff policy as a way of encouraging or promoting exports from the country. Now, and you have studied certain specific sectors and presented impressive data. Now, I'm just taking the example. I'm studying 50 manufacturing companies in Kerala, which all are MSMEs, which started as very small startups, and over the years have grown into substantial players with turnovers 500 crores, 1,000 crores, and in very unusual. When I say unusual, and many of them are export-oriented units. Like one is a steel casting unit in Kozhikode, which has been rated by international agencies as the most efficient steel casting unit in India. I think more than 90% of their production is exported, and their customers reads like a who's who of. Now, I don't think there is any tariff. Forget the inverted tariff business. There's no tariff which is promoting them, which is supporting them, etc. Now, you take, I set up a company which is in Trivandrum itself, which for making high-tech medical devices based on indigenous know-how, technology developed by us. No advantages. In fact, initially we suffered from inverted tariff because the finished product was at one time duty-free, but later on attracted, thanks to me filing the first anti-dumping duty petition in Indian Commerce Ministry history. We got 40% duty on the finished product. But I had to pay 160% duty at that time, 160% duty for importing high-quality needles, for the blood drawing needles. So we became, we have been, consistently winning export awards. We outcompeted our Chinese competitor. And today it is one of the largest factories in the world making that particular product. So this is anecdotal information. But what I'm trying to say is, I do not see any connection between. Perhaps there is a story there. Tariff, etc., will only bring in foreign investment. Firms from other locations will come in just to take advantage of the tariff differentials. But the only permanent way to promote an export-led sector, which can, an export-led manufacturing sector, which can lead to rapid economic development, will be to have entrepreneurs, to have a technology capacity building, to have training, to have a broad front of actions to be taken, and where India has the capability, as it has demonstrated. But otherwise, I don't see just tariff variations leading to. Because all these are like will be footloose industries. Somebody comes here because there is a tariff. If the tariff differential changes, they lose interest and go somewhere else. So it won't be permanent. We won't be doing any serious capacity building in India. But I am seeing impressive evidence of MSMEs which started small, have grown. Manufacturing sector are all exporters, and most of them are doing extremely well even now.
I agree with that story, and you have also mentioned in your chapter, that book which is forthcoming, about those success cases, and they are very impressive. And I completely agree with that argument. But the difference between what you are highlighting in those cases, which are quite successful, and the things that I have in mind, there is one major difference. One is that when you talk about these high-tech products in certain segments, you are talking about certain things which are highly niche market, like something where it has a high niche market in certain market, and you identify those areas and then do that. A state like Kerala can very much do that because it has a relatively skilled labor. It has other, even though it has disadvantages like it does not have a huge land area for constructing huge industries, etc. But then with the available constraints which Kerala has, but the advantages is the skilled manpower that Kerala state has. Obviously, Kerala kind of a state has a competitive advantage in certain niche areas in high technology products, and that is what you are talking about, and that is what that success story is. But when you talk to situations in India as a whole, like we have this kind of mass scale manufacturing, like manufacturing which employs tens of thousands of workers in huge facilities, like when Foxconn employ workers when they do assembly for Samsung and that Apple, they employ lots of tens of thousands of workers in their factory. The wage rate that they give to their workers may not be the best. It may be smaller wage rate, but then a big advantage of that is that that is the first entry for many low-skilled, less educated people, workforce, into a formal enterprise. That is the first entry that is possible. Now, that type of an opportunity in this kind of mass-scale manufacturing sector, whether it is in electronics assembly or in garment manufacturing, labor-intensive products, that has not yet happened in the context of in India. Kerala, those success stories are well taken, and there is reason why those entrepreneurship succeeded. People obviously like you have played a great role in that, and that is very much appreciated. But there is a bigger other opportunity that is outside there, which we are missing out. For this, what we need obviously the domestic enterprises. Without that, nothing will work. But at the same time, we need the lead firms. The lead firms are from other countries. The big MNEs, which are operating in each one of these high-tech segments, need to come to India, not to sell in the Indian market. We need to attract them to come to India, set up their facilities here, establish their linkages with the domestic entrepreneurs, domestic firms, like in the case of automobile, like multinational companies came to Chennai, then all these huge auto ancillaries came up there. Many of them are domestic, and even the foreign companies also came. The parts and component producers also came. So these type of a story need to happen also elsewhere in other sectors where we have missed it, like in electronic manufacturing and unskilled labor-intensive industries like textiles, garments, and all that. So